marvels of this world and give us the ability to explore the mysteries of creation. You fill the earth with the spirit of wisdom and inspire us to search for the truth. You have sent us prophets and teachers as witnesses to your liberating justice. You have come among us in Jesus Christ to teach us by word and example how to love one another. Help us in this new academic year to enjoy our learning together and enable us to take delight in exploration. Give us patience in our studies and strength to meet new challenges. We pray all of this through the inspiration of your Spirit. Amen.
As we begin a new semester of life together, we gather to affirm the liberating power of faith and learning, where the Spirit of the Lord is there in freedom.
As people of all backgrounds,
We embrace diversity and challenge one another
to learn in community, to discern our callings,
and serve with distinction for the common good.
What does the Lord require of you?
But to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God.
As a college of the church, we are rooted in grace and freedom
That emboldens us with worship,
study, and service, to seek truth, examine our faith,
and care for God's people.
Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you.
Let the nations be glad and sing for joy. As a liberal arts college, we are committed to the way of learning that moves us beyond immediate interests and present knowledge to the larger world. An education that disciplines minds and develops whole persons, equipped to understand and confront the changing society. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths.
As a residential college, Luther is a place of intersection.
We gather where river, woodland, and prairie meet.
On either side of the river is the tree of life.
And the leaves of the tree are the healing of the nations. We practice joyful stewardship of the resources that surround us, and we strive to be a community where students, faculty, and staff are enlivened and transformed by encounters with one another, by the exchange of ideas, and by the life of faith and learning. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds.
Good morning. Welcome to the opening convocation of 2022. We are so happy to have Francisco Cantu back with us, to see seniors who were first years when Francisco was first with us, to see brand new first year and transfer students, and to honor our endowed professors. In 2019, we read Francisco's book and we thought about the pain of borders that become dividing lines, both literal and figurative. I wish that I could say that 2022 has seen an era of progress in terms of healing and unity, but that is not so. And yet, we are here as educators, or as people wishing to be educated. And that places us in a pace and a space of responsibility to ask what our role is as people who recognize that all is not yet known. How do we bring the willingness to teach and to learn to the challenge of a fractured world? That's a big question for an early morning. But I hope you will keep it in mind as we welcome our speaker back to Luther College and hear his words. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome, Francisco. It is my pleasure to invite Matt Beatty forward.
Good morning. My name is Matt Beatty, Director of Admissions. This morning I am honored to represent the Office of Enrollment while introducing 428 new students to the Luther College community. These talented young scholars represent the future of our great institution, and trust me when I tell you our future is bright. The students joining the Luther family this week have shown themselves to be active, inquisitive, engaged, and resilient, the very same qualities shared by past generations of Luther students. I would like to take a brief moment to recognize and thank our enrollment team members in admissions and financial aid. These new students are here today in a large part because of their tireless efforts, and I'm incredibly proud of the work they did to bring this talented group to Luther. I'd also like to thank the faculty, staff members, administrators, and current students who directly or indirectly assisted and impacted our new students during their college search process. And to those new students joining us today, I would like to express a very heartfelt thank you to you as well. I know I speak for everyone in admissions and financial aid when I say it has been an absolute pleasure getting to know you over the past 12 months, or maybe just the last 7 days. Reviewing your applications, reading your admissions essays, building relationships with you and your family members, and learning about your interests and talents has made one thing very clear to our community. You belong here, and you're going to make Luther College a better place. Your list of accomplishments is as impressive as it is extensive, and while it would take me the rest of the day to list all of your honors and awards, I did want to highlight a few highlights here. You come to us today from 24 states and 33 different countries. 21 of you transferred to Luther from one of 18 different post-secondary institutions. 45 of you are the son or daughter of a Luther alum. 248 of you were named to your high school honor roll or college dean's list. 162 are National Honor Society members, with 18 of you serving as officers and 2 National Merit finalists. 160 have taken at least one college class already, and 164 of you took at least one AP exam. I believe only 4 of you, though, really enjoyed those exams. 47 are youth leaders in church, 49 of you have participated in a mission or service trip, and 94 have been recognized for your involvement in community service. In athletics, 165 were awarded a varsity letter, 88 earned all-state, all-district, or all-conference honors, and 120 served as team captains. 88 of you participated in state music competition, with 64 being named all-state. 28 participated in state speech, forensics, state debate, or mock trial. 119 participated in student government or school organizations, with 86 serving as officers. Finally, 112 of you are the first in your family to attend college. It's clear every single one of you has served your schools and communities in countless other ways that are equally impressive and impactful. Now I implore you to keep going, get involved, make a difference, and leave your own mark on this place. President Ward, Interim Provost Chamberlain, members of the faculty, staff, and Luther community, it is my great honor to commend this class to you. Students, will you please rise? Look to your left, look to your right, at all of your fellow classmates, and join me and those of us on stage in a hearty round of applause to celebrate and welcome our new first-year and transfer students.
Good morning. Part of the celebration at Convocation each year is installing new endowed chairs, professorships, fellowships, and center directors. Today we are installing 4 members of the faculty in these roles. The Kermit O. and Jane E. Hansen Professorship in History is named in honor of Kermit O. Hansen, class of 38, and Jane E. Hansen, class of 39, whose support for the college included an endowment gift to establish the Hansen Professorship. The award recognizes the value of educational opportunities and the quality of the academic program provided by Luther College, and in recognition of dedicated faculty in the area of history who influenced the Hansens' lives and careers. The Kermit O. and Jane E. Hansen Professorship in History for 2022 through 2025 is Anna Peterson. The Marilyn Roverud Endowed Fellowship in Lutheran Studies was established in celebration of our namesake, Martin Luther, and in honor of the inspired leadership of Marilyn Haugen Roverud, class of 66, alumna, regent, synod volunteer, mother, patron of the arts, friend, and more by the Roverud family. As a liberal arts institution and college of the church, Luther embraces a way of learning described by Dr. Darrell Joddock as the third way, committed to academic freedom, to seek the truth, respectful of other faith traditions, and disciplined to seek whatever will truly serve the needs of the neighbor and make the world more trustworthy. It is the Roverud family's intent that this fellowship serve as a catalyst for lively and informed discussion about what it means to be a college of the church. The Marilyn Roverud Endowed Fellowship in Lutheran Studies for 2022 through 2024 is Brooke Joyce. The Russell R. Roulan Endowed Chair in Biology honors Russell R. Roulan, Professor of Biology at Luther College from 1963 to 2000, whose teaching and mentoring skills helped numerous students advance to careers in medicine and establish Luther's biology and pre-med program as one of the best among liberal arts colleges. It is awarded to a Luther professor who has demonstrated excellence in teaching biology and dedication to serving as an advisor and mentor to students. The Roulan Endowment was created by the support of colleagues, friends, and alumni who were beneficiaries of Roulan's teaching and mentoring skills. The Roulan Chair will devote part of their time to a project that will enhance the training of students in science. The Russell R. Roulan Endowed Chair in Biology for 2022 through 2025 is Stephanie Freda. The Center for Ethics and Public Engagement exists to enhance the liberal education Luther promises to its students. By encouraging deep reflection about ethical matters and responsible citizenship, the center should help students learn something of what it means to live a good life. Specifically, the center promotes research, writing, and an ongoing conversation about the public choices confronting society and the role ethics ought to play in making those choices. The director of the center, appointed from the Luther faculty for a 5-year term, will guide both on-campus and external initiatives in keeping with its purpose. The director of the Center for Ethics and Public Engagement for 2022 through 2027 is Andrew Hageman.
My name is Evelyn Montoya, and I am honored to introduce Francisco Cantu, the author of The Line Becomes a River, Dispatches from the Border. His book has received widespread recognition since its publication in 2018. The author has been a sought-after speaker and writer on matters related not only to immigration and borders, but about the American mythologies that contribute to violence and injustice. His book was my summer read as a first-year student in 2019, and since then it has become a regular part of the Paideia curriculum. As a first-generation college student of immigrant parents, my interest to learn about immigration and borders has always been a topic I've studied and done research on, and one of the reasons why I chose anthropology as my major. For J-term last year, I worked with Professor Thompson, who was in the Spanish department, on ways we could incorporate diverse voices into the Paideia curriculum, and one of those ways was by reading and discussing books by Hispanic and Latinx authors. We reread Francisco Cantu's book along with others, such as Sara Uribe's Antigona Gonzalez, which was added to the curriculum this year, and Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions by Valeria Lucet. At the end of J-term, we met with the Paideia faculty team, and we presented various proposals and discussed how these books could be added into the curriculum into the upcoming years. Paideia is a crucial part of a student's journey here at Luther, and it opens a conversation beyond the classroom. We are thrilled to have Francisco Cantu here to join the conversation. Please join me in welcoming him back to Luther College.
Thank you so much to Evelyn for that wonderful introduction. Thanks to President Ward and to everybody else who made it possible for me to come back here. It's so wonderful to be back. And thanks also to everyone who's teaching or reading my book. It means the world to me, it really does. And also, congratulations to all of you for setting out on this new chapter in your academic journey. This past summer, I spent a lot of time thinking, as Evelyn mentioned, about the power of storytelling and the potency of some of our country's founding myths. For me, this preoccupation began as I began to comprehend the details of the mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas in May, where 19 children and 2 teachers lost their lives. Among all of the horrifying news, one of the details that stood out to me was the fact that 2 of the assault rifles used to sow terror at Robb Elementary were purchased by the shooter in celebration of his 18th birthday, as if the acquisition of these deadly weapons represented a kind of rite of passage into American manhood. This detail actually fits neatly into a larger pattern that has seen many of this country's mass shooters acquire their arms with the semblance of a coming-of-age ritual. The gun used in last year's shooting at Michigan's Oxford High School, for example, was a Christmas present given to the 15-year-old shooter by his parents. And the 20-year-old perpetrator of the 2012 shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, grew up with a mother who often turned to guns as a way to bond with her difficult-to-reach son, before he eventually used her own weapons to murder her in her sleep, before slaughtering 26 others at Sandy Hook Elementary. I am one of those Americans, like so many others, who have been called into relationship with guns since I was a child. And I've been made to understand, even long before I could articulate it, that guns represented something essential about what it means to become a fully realized American man. Our stories have been steeped in guns for so long that they have become an almost inevitable seeming element of our lives, saddling us with institutions resigned to their power. Guns, after all, have long been an integral part of our national mythology, woven deep into our most sacred lore about the winning of our independence, about manifest destiny and territorial expansion, about the defense of democracy and the spread of our empire across the globe. At the center of this mythos is a single abiding archetype, that of the rugged individual and his gun. This figure, who is usually white, male, and positioned in opposition to people of color, has been represented throughout history in many familiar forms. The musket-toting militiaman with a revolutionary zeal for liberty, the cowboy chasing freedom with a six-shooter across a frontier full of hostile natives, or the soldier with a standard-issue rifle deployed to conquer or save a distant people, politically or morally inferior to his own. In each case, the gun is an essential counterpart, serving like King Arthur's sword or Luke Skywalker's lightsaber as the one tool that makes possible the hero's journey. For me, guns were made into a familiar thing since the earliest years of my childhood. My first guns were toys, of course, followed in turn by a pump-action Daisy BB gun that I used to shoot down Green Army men in my father's garage. Then came the real guns. The .22 rifle I learned to shoot at summer camp in the 4th grade, the handgun my father taught me to use during a boyhood visit to a friend's ranch in Nevada, and the Colt 1911 he let me fire years later that had been carried by my grandfather throughout his service in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. As I became older, I was given guns of my own by my father, my mother's boyfriend, and then by the United States government upon my graduation from the Border Patrol Academy at 23. Today, it still feels difficult to explain the impulse that first drew me to apply for a job with the United States Border Patrol. I was 22 years old when I sent in my paperwork, on the cusp of graduating college, a time during which I had become obsessed with understanding the tension and unease that had for so long festered along the US-Mexico border. The same line I knew once played a part in determining my own ancestors' lives in a way I only vaguely understood. In those hopeful days after graduating college, I imagined that joining the Border Patrol might allow me to understand the physical terrain of the border in a way that little else could. And I became confident that even if I was made to participate in the border's cruel realities, I would nevertheless be able to act as a force for good within the agency, finding subtle ways of helping the migrants I encountered and of slowly changing the system from within. I was filled in those days with a very American kind of naivete, one that flowed from a mythology that had long positioned the individual as a force powerful enough to change long-standing institutions through a sheer force of will, a belief exacerbated by the hero-centered narratives of countless books and movies and simplified retellings of history, all of which incessantly posit that any one of us is capable of introducing humanity into entirely inhumane systems, instead of the far more likely outcome, that we, instead, are left entirely misshapen by them, barely recognizable even to our former selves. Growing up in West Texas and Arizona, I had spent much of my childhood obsessed with cowboys and westerns, and I realize now that the image of the gun-toting men riding across a desolate landscape must have been part of what attracted me to become a border agent. Indeed, many of the people I worked with imagined themselves as modern-day cowboys upholding order along a forsaken frontier, a place they often spoke of as if it comprised some sort of desert hellscape, with haunted canyons and vampire villages and remote hills that hid lost gates to the underworld. If we take a moment to examine our national history, this foreboding desert mythos comes as little surprise. Ever since Europeans first entered North America's deserts, the terrain has been perceived as a place of scarcity, a treacherous in-between space separating one promised land from the next. In the era of manifest destiny, the region was saddled with one bleak narrative after the other. It was the Wild West's non-arable wasteland. It was the most hostile corner of Indian country, It was the unruly Mexican frontier, a place that was altogether violent, hard scrabble, and rough, that could only be brought under control by indomitable perseverance and force. In the Border Patrol, I witnessed firsthand how these lingering impressions of worthlessness continued to give sanction to day-to-day ravagings of the terrain. Agents, most of whom lived hours away from the remote communities they policed, found a special kind of glee in romping and ripping across the open desert in government trucks and ATVs, lighting fire to discarded vehicles and towering cacti, and strewing the ground with all manner of refuse and debris left to degrade for all eternity under the sun. On reservation land, the impulse was exacerbated even further, with agents muttering things like trash on trash as they engaged in casual desecration, revealing old racist attitudes about the value of indigenous land. Once, riding shotgun in a Border Patrol Humvee, I remember laughing along as my coworkers tore off-road across thickly vegetated bajadas, flattening car-sized creosote bushes and driving headlong into tree-sized cholla cactus that exploded like fireworks against the vehicle's armored windshield. All the while, a camera operator guided us towards a group of smugglers fleeing on horseback, and each of us must have felt somewhere in the chaos-loving recesses of our hearts that we were living out an unburied boyhood fantasy, imagining ourselves as cowboy lawmen chasing smugglers across a strange and foreboding frontier. Today, when I reflect back on this time, it is hard not to feel stunned at how deeply the violent cowboy archetype embedded itself into my soul, how the myth of rugged individualism superseded stories and lessons of human care and stewardship I had been taught by my parents and loved ones from the earliest days of consciousness. But national mythologies, steeped in violent notions of individual superiority, white supremacy, misogyny, and consumption, have all been honed through centuries of rhetoric and history-making to be delivered to us in myriad forms. And these stories are often so insidiously powerful that they can override, before we even know it, the values that have been so painstakingly instilled in us by our loved ones and our communities. For me, this has been made clear by the realization that in the Border Patrol, I allowed myself to be conscripted into the work of impeding migrants from following the same course my ancestors once set upon themselves. And despite all the love of the natural world that had been instilled in me by my parents, I was nevertheless made at moments to gleefully rampage across a desert landscape I had been raised to cherish. Reverence for this landscape could scarcely be imagined by most of the agents I worked with, even as they stepped over sweet edible mesquite pods, cholla buds, and fallen saguaro fruits that have for centuries been gathered by native peoples to be fermented into wine, even as they followed, unknowingly, ancient salt trails that led past dripping springs and hidden stone pools and marshland oases to the nearby Gulf, where pink and white crystals are still gathered from the ground during yearly pilgrimages to the vast and shimmering coastline. These things were known to me because the earliest years of my childhood were spent in the Guadalupe Mountains National Park, where my mother worked as an interpretive park ranger. As a boy, my mother introduced this remote corner of the West Texas desert to me as a vast wonderland, a terrestrial canvas for fascination and awe. To counteract the spellbinding nature of the endless vistas, my mother endlessly urged me to cast my gaze to the ground, to lie face down on the earth, rocks, and grass, to search for rodent holes and bird nests, beetles and millipedes, toads and tree frogs, cocoons and chrysalises. She wanted me to relish in the dirt-bound curiosity that was usually discouraged in other children, to become familiar with the things that elicited aversion or fear in most others. And so she taught me to recognize venomous snakes, how to quiet a captured lizard by rubbing its blue belly, how to keep my hands flat and still so that passing tarantulas might walk calmly across them. As an interpretive ranger, my mother's duties were not only to help protect and preserve the natural beauty of the parklands, but more specifically to interpret the stories of those places for visitors by describing the interconnectedness of the flora, the fauna, and the human inhabitants that mingled there throughout history. Storytelling wasn't just something my mother did for work, however. It was something that became second nature to her. And ever since I can remember, our home was filled with songs and folk tales. Stories of talking animals and forces of nature sprung to life. From the time that I was barely able to speak, I learned the names of trees and rivers, the cycles of seasons and storms, the sounds and signs of creatures moving just outside our doors, close and always lingering around us. My mother shamelessly animated the world with human qualities. The moon was a face in the night sky, the wind a voice that whispered and raged and came from far beyond. The trees were old and wise like a grandmother, and each animal was a possible friend or acquaintance, with a life as comprehensible and meaningful as our own. By making our wild surroundings legible in this way, she brought a sense of magic to the terrain around us, a love for the land she hoped would cause me to feel rooted in place, instilling in me a sense of accountability to protect and care for the world outdoors. This was also part and parcel of what she brought each day to the park's visitors, a gospel of enchantment that she spread wherever she went. Something I have recently been coming to terms with is how much of my and my mother's connection to the outdoors is also rooted in myth, in grand narratives that position the American wilderness as a kind of monument. So many of our national parks, after all, are not only sites of preservation, but of erasure as well. Sites where the original inhabitants were snuffed out and where lived-in environments were reformed in part as they existed in the mind of a colonizing populace, repackaged as sites of primeval solitude never before trodden by human footsteps. For my mother, as for so many others, the stories of these cherished places, what Terry Tempest Williams calls the closest thing we have to sacred land, helped anchor her in the idea that wild spaces could fill a lacuna within. But even this seemingly noble regard for the land is one that comes at great cost, a notion that flows, in spite of all of its reverence, in an unbroken line from acts of violence that remain ongoing, open wounds that still fester beneath shimmering panoramas. For my mother, I believe that these myths helped the outdoors serve, in part, to fill the void that was left by never being made to fully understand where she came from. As a child, her parents' early separation meant that she was raised by her Midwestern mother, far away from her Mexican father. And so the stories that might instill pride or joy in this part of her heritage were unknown. Because of this, my mother's Mexicanness became something that she never grew to understand, something that made her strange, something she was subtly taught to minimize, to be ashamed of. I now suspect that the absence of these familial stories must have caused my mother to turn ever more outward, to construct an idea of herself, to find meaning in the joyful outdoor spaces that surrounded her, a vast and storied Western terrain that was steeped in myth, brimming with superimposed narratives of discovery and solace that for my mother would have been far more accessible than her own family story. In this way, the landscape must have offered her an element of certainty, or at least the kind of mystery that could be understood and investigated, interpreted and described. Immigrant identity is frequently understood as something shaped by cycles of loss and reclamation, determined most often by outside forces, the violence of governments and poverty, the upheaval of societal rupture and cultural change. But when stories and traditions are left behind, new myths soon rise up to take their place, presaging the internal struggle that often lies ahead. The newcomer, their children, their children's children, each is progressively subsumed into the unwavering machinations of assimilation, venturing closer and closer to an identity always represented as more desirable than their own. I believe that my ancestors were taught to abandon parts of their identity, much as my mother was. During their early, most formative years in the United States, with the benefit of their light skin, they would have learned to quickly erase parts of themselves, or, more precisely, to erase the places they came from, expunging Mexico from their outward selves in ways both simple and profound. Such acts of reinvention, so often associated with the migrant experience, are also a kind of disappearance, the slow and quiet replacement of one story with another, more powerful one. These inescapable narratives, which continue to estrange so many of us from ourselves, are fearsome not just for how they become ingrained into a national psyche, but for the way they become so deeply woven into our own confused hearts. For many of us, when we think of national mythologies and family lore, we imagine stories buried in the past alongside deceased historical figures and bygone ancestors. The indigenous scholar Leanne Betasamosake Simpson argues that our lives are lived alongside those that preceded us. My ancestors are not in the past, she explains. The spiritual world does not exist in some mythical realm. These forces and beings are right here beside me, inspiring, loving, and caring for me in each moment and compelling me to do the same. Simpson's ancestors lead her to reject aggressive forms of power and to instead live and work across generations, across borders and nations and identities, in collaboration with the people, plants, animals, and terrain that surrounds her. For non-Indigenous people, those of us who may be descended from long lines of settlers and conquistadors, living alongside our ancestors may entail a different kind of groundedness, one that decenters the idea of ourselves as history's protagonists, recognizing that our roots here may not reach back as far or as deep as we like to think. For many of us, living alongside our ancestors also means being cognizant of how they were conscripted from one generation to the next by forces seemingly outside their control to live in ways that sometimes wrought death and destruction across the land. Violence in our past, however, does not destine us to perpetuate it in the future. And while violence cannot be undone, it may certainly be demetabolized and deperpetuated. And recognition of it can cause us to change how we act, how we live, and who we side with. Acknowledging the harmful legacies that flow through our national and familial narratives can also empower us to live communally instead of individually, to restore, remap, and resignify the places we call home, and to tell new and truer stories about ourselves and the people we love. When I lived in the Guadalupe Mountains with my mother, we had to drive over an hour and a half to reach the nearest grocery store. And on our weekly trips to the city, the highway across the desert was often so empty that we saw more jackrabbits than passing cars. I remember loving my mother's stories so much in those days that during these long drives I would beg her to tell me tales to pass the time, one after another. These requests would often exhaust her, and it wasn't long before she implemented a new rule, refusing to tell me another story until I told her one in return. As a 4-year-old, I would insist that I didn't know any stories, but my mother refused to make my story for me and simply pointed toward the horizon, asking me what I saw. And so my own stories often began with the same ingredients that hers did, with animals, with wind, with mountains, but they meandered and roamed in unpredictable, childlike ways, freely associating and inventing new narratives. Mythology is something different than this, of course, for it involves a kind of non-participatory storytelling. Instead of allowing us to improvise our own stories from one generation to the next, our nation's myths about rugged individualism, about wild spaces, about the assimilation of immigrants, have all been constructed to uphold nostalgic, exceptionalist, and simplified notions of who we are, notions that have long perpetuated violence, erasure, and destruction, instilling in us outdated and exclusionary notions of national identity. Myth-making and storytelling is a profound kind of power. But what I learned from my mother is that it is a power close at hand for each and every one of us. Once we recognize them, we can cease retelling those myths of the past that harm us, that do harm to others and the world around us, and instead re-examine, reinvent, and subvert them into something new, into stories that reflect who we are and who we want to be. We, it turns out, are the myth makers we've been waiting for. Thank you.
you please stand? And now, may God bless us with deep discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, injustice, starvation, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in the world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done. Go now in peace to love, to learn, and to serve. Thanks be to God.